Hey guys, Justin with Deep Dive Stocks here, and today we're going to be looking at the top 5 VoEx findings that you need to be able to identify. Let's go ahead and get started. The first finding is stable VoEx. We want to know when a VoEx is stable, and typically this is classified as a VoEx trend that is inside of the stable zone or between those two horizontal lines. The VoEx-daily typically has what we call non-spiky behavior, but it is typically just hanging out or rotating around VoEx-trend, and the usual outcome is a steady appreciation in price. We see that here with PPC, where after some pretty significant VoEx behavior in late 2021, ever since VoEx-trend fell into the stable zone, there's been a nice appreciation in price, even with these large dips in price here in the most recent, in June of 2022. Since VoEx hasn't responded pretty drastically and is still hanging out in the stable zone, we can be very confident that the price will continue to rise. The next finding is VoEx in the inhibition zone, which this is where VoEx trend is above that top horizontal line inside of the inhibition zone. VoEx-daily is variable, but you'll typically see it start to exhibit some pretty spiky behavior as VoEx trend continues its journey into the inhibition zone. There were two outcomes to note with VoEx in the inhibition zone, and the first is a short term, which is a rapid rise in price. The idea is that as that price action itself is unstable, so it kind of feeds on itself and bursts upwards. However, that instability that VoEx is picking up on will eventually take over and bring the price back down to the original value that it was when VoEx trend left the stable zone. And we see here on RLC a very classic example where every time that VoEx trend leaves the stable zone into the inhibition zone, we see a steady rise in price and then an eventual fall. And we see here where it started to fall, the price went up and we had a very beautiful VoEx spike, which we will talk about later. But we see here again, VoEx trend goes into the inhibition zone. Originally, it is a bullish finding, but almost invariably and statistically significantly so, the price will fall as the instability mounts and takes over in the price. The third finding is VoEx inside of the propagation zone, and this is where VoEx is below that bottom horizontal line inside of the propagation zone. The VoEx-daily is variable, but just like the VoEx-trend or VoEx in the inhibition zone, VoEx-daily will typically exhibit some spiky and dramatic behavior. The usual outcome is a drastic decline in price, and this can be very a long duration. Persistent and continued decline in price is how I usually describe it. And we see here on UMC, this is quite the case, where VoEx trend fell into the propagation zone in late January of 2022, and since then has exhibited some persistent declines in price, losing almost 50% of its value ever since that happened. And here we see that spiky VoEx daily behavior that we described. The fourth finding are VoEx spikes. So those spiky behaviors, they have a name and they're cataloged. The VoEx trend for VoEx spikes isn't really included. This is a VoEx daily thing. And as we've seen, they're variable, they can be large upwards and downwards movements, and they occur in a short time frame. In other words, they're spiky. The usual outcome is a drastic movement in price, and it is usually to the downside, but just to be certain, we can go ahead and consult our table in the market scan that tells us how the price will evolve over the 5 days after the VoEx spike, depending on how large the spike was, and if VoEx was initially in the inhibition zone or in the propagation zone. We can see a beautiful example of the most common finding of VoEx spikes here, where on AG, where kind of like micro spasms of instability, where the price appreciates, VoEx daily spikes, and the price falls. The price appreciates, VoEx daily begins to spike, the price falls. And even on these shorter time frames, on the 1 to 2 days, the price goes up, VoEx spikes significantly, the price falls. And so these VoEx spikes are very statistically significant for future price decline. And this is a very common example on a stock. And you know, whenever we see this, that any appreciation in price that is provoking a VoEx spike isn't long for this world. The last VoEx finding is just a classic abnormal VoEx. The VoEx trend can be pretty variable. The VoEx daily can be chaotic, spiky, wide movements, and over a larger time frame than you would expect just VoEx spikes to occur. The usual outcome is drastic movements in price, and usually on the downside. And the idea is that if a stock's VoEx is unstable, well, the stock is very unstable. So it is likely to exhibit wide movements in price, but like all unstable stocks, it will typically resolve finally on the downside. And we can see this is the case in ADSK, where the spiking behavior in September of 2021 was very odd. So was the subsequent spiking behavior in November of 2021. And we see that as the price fell, VoEx began to calm down as that instability was removed from the stock. So those are the top 5 findings for VoEx. Thank you for joining me. My name is Justin, and happy trading. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.